Jen, happy that you're on the show today. There's so much ground to cover, and as we're talking about before recording, I think a natural, obviously, place for our conversation is going to be about all things marketing, all things advertising. As someone that's a veteran in the field, you've seen your share of ups and downs of the industry. How do you state how do you position the current landscape? So, what's important on your for you in terms of the key trends, the key things that keep you occupied?
I think we could spend hours on that. That's an interesting question. I think there's the obvious, and if you just scroll on your LinkedIn feed, you would hear about the in-housing, which like we've seen a bit of a spit, like a bit of a swing from one side to the other. We've seen a lot of clients take things in-house. We've actually seen a lot of clients bringing it back to the agency. We're also seeing like recruitment being a massive, massive challenge. It is not just an advertising challenge, but it's definitely something top of mind for the agencies. And obviously the rise of e-com, but I think those are all just expected things that you would see in the trends. One thing that I'm kind of passionate about, and I've been spending a lot of time on this in the last year, is the fundamental shift that we're seeing right now, which really requires transformation. We hear a lot about diversity, equity, inclusion. There was obviously George Floyd, Black Lives Matters in Canada. There was the Indigenous community, and I think when you look at all of this coming, it really challenges our take as a media industry. Because when you take a step back and you think about it, media is all about grouping people based on common attributes. So by default, when you think about media, there's induced bias, right? Then, like, if we go back into buying TV, still today, your buying currency is age group, and it's 25-54 for most of it. I don't know for you, but I don't think I will be the same people at 54 than I was at 25. Like, that's kind of a nonsense. So one trend, and I'm not sure if it's a trend, but I think it's an underlying current that we will see is how do we start to unbias the data, and how do we start to rethink about the media discipline to create cohorts of people? Because obviously, at the end of the day, you will always have to have a scalable group of people that you want to talk to. But how do you think about it in targeting people not based on attribute that they were born with, but based on who they are as people? And I think it's something that we're not talking about. We do see a lot of company pledging that they want to spend more in local, or pledging that they want to change the way they're doing things, or pledging that they want to support local media or minority media. But I do fundamentally feel that our industry needs to do a shift that is more than a shift. It's a full transformation. And we talk about data, and obviously everyone who's in media would talk about data. I actually feel that we have a job that is, how do we create unbiased data? And unbiasing data is, how do you look at the causal effect from one to the other, but also algorithm. Like, algorithm by default will identify behavior and create patterns, which, when you think about it, it's a recipe to create bias. So that's something that fundamentally it's a personal passion. I've been investing a lot of time in it, but I do feel that it's something that we're not talking enough about, and it's something that will requires the industry to change as a whole, from an agency perspective, from an advertiser perspective, and from a publisher and media owner perspective as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. It feels like we're still so early days in this challenge that you mentioned, right? Like this notion of like, grouping people together, segmenting it. I imagine it's even more acute in media, like you said, where you don't have first party data. You're there. You're based. You're employing other people's data to make the targeting, be it on traditional or even in digital channels. I guess if you're a advertiser and you have, let's say you mentioned e-commerce, etc. Well, you can probably model behaviors much more accurately, right? If you segment based on what people bought and like, tie it in and create cohorts specifically. How much in the work that you do are you looking at uh, breadcrumbs left by by users, by consumers, and then tying that back to media. Like, how advanced is this, like taking first party data, marrying it to the media landscape? I know back when I was in the industry, it was really just starting. I imagine it's evolved a lot. Be curious,
Yeah.
like,
I think it's, well, obviously it has evolved. It's fundamental. I don't know any advertiser who's not doing it, especially as we're looking at the end of cookie. I think it was kind of a wake up call for many to really invest into collecting first party data. Um, I think it's interesting, but I will also be the devil advocate in that is I feel like we've seen similar to when I was talking, like we've seen advertiser go with things in-house and then they go back to the agency side. I feel like we're also seeing a lot of advertisers that go all in into first party data and forget about syndicated data. And at the end of the day, you need to ask yourself, are you just talking to the people you know? Or are you talking to the people that you don't know? And I think first party data are amazing. You can create patterns, you can identify behaviors, you can obviously use this to create lookalike, but there is a reality that if you look at what you have, you will never see the future. And I think it's finding the balance between the two. And I feel like we're literally at the cups of it, where people are starting to think about how can I enrich my first party data? So I have what I have, but how can I use other sources of data through data lake, and how can I actually find ways to merge it, which in Canada is quite of a challenge, right? Because we don't have, well, there's a lot of legislation and you don't have a live ramp, or it exists, but the match rate is really, really low. You don't have the same as the US. So obviously, if you compare yourself with the US, the reality in matching data in Canada is very different. It requires creativity, but I do feel that we're now at a point where first party data is a base. It's the foundation of what you're doing, but you need to get to the second level, which is enriching it. And also having what we call zero party data, which is self-declared. Like first party is, yes, you gave your email, but why are we not asking people what they like? I feel like the future is the self-declared. And I think at the end of the day, there's something that we forgot as an industry is that internet is free because you give your data in exchange. But I feel at the beginning of it, we didn't brought the consumer in. We were not very clear with that. It needs to be a value exchange with the consumer as well. And I do feel that when we're clear on the value exchange, consumer will be willing to give data, and that will become the zero party data, which will be way more reliable than the first party data.
yeah, there's some neat trends, like you mentioned. Like, there's this need of transformation, like the cookies going away, essentially, right? So it's like all the
Yeah.
things that you spoke about, consumer data platforms. We're like at this next wave of this intelligence that's coming in, which I have zero knowledge about. So it's great to hear you speak about it, really, as a leader in the space that really gets it and thinks about how people will be using it, and also the impact on the consumer side, right? We've seen a little bit of backlash when it comes to these platforms, so it's great to think about the next iteration. We should probably avoid some of the mistakes of the first wave.
And think about the loyalty program back in the days. Like people were very aware that when they were subscribing to Air Miles, well, they were getting some rewards in exchange of sharing their consumer pattern behavior and their purchase. Like it was very clear. The transaction and the value creation was very clear for the user. In exchange of someone gathering the information from all my purchase data, I'm receiving rewards that I can exchange for goods. I think we need to bring that back a bit in the internet world, because like we're giving away our data for free. And I do feel that the consumer needs to feel that they're getting something in return. And it has to be a bit more tangible than just you're getting free information in internet.
Yeah. What about the state of non-connected media, right? Quote unquote traditional media, right? So like, I've always said, oh, traditional media is dead, or it's like it's lost its cultural relevance to a certain extent. So curious to hear about things that we're still a bit of a ways away of really connecting things like radio and obviously print and out of home and TV. Curious to hear you is like what's up with traditional media?
Yeah, you and I had a bit of a heated debate on that around a glass of wine. I'm actually, offline media is not dead. Like, let's be honest, it is not dead. If you just look at inflation from a offline media perspective, and I'll take TV specifically, it is absolutely crazy. Like we're looking at a market with inflation at 10% right now for TV. And the reason for that is reach has gone down, but there's more and more advertiser that wants to be in TV because the reality is that your message gets attention in TV and resonate well and creates awareness, and brand lift study are showing that. So what we're seeing is that there's more and more advertisers that are going to TV. There's less people that watch it, and that I would agree with. But let's also be mindful that you're not all consumer. The population is aging, and there's still a lot of people that are watching TV. And same for print. Like I'm amazed to see how magazine are still in quite healthy. I would say the news we've seen a very big shift towards digital, and in Quebec, La Presse was obviously leading the way, and they've achieved an amazing transformation. But when you look at magazine, like it's going well. It's going well because people like the fact that they have something that is in their hands that they will not necessarily read cover to cover. They will read few pages and then it's going to be on the coffee table. So I think there is a role for everything. Not everything will have to be connected. The one thing, though, that will have to be connected is the way you buy it. So from an agency perspective, obviously we're trying to look into technology to minimize the work that is required to access the inventory. And I think this is where programmatic was a big breakthrough in the digital world, because as opposed to call 15 website and have a transaction with 15 website and make sure that the 15 website will send you an invoice, programmatic allowed you to do it into one platform, one single invoice. So from an operational perspective, it is obviously very efficient. So I do feel that this is what we need to see from the offline media, is a way to access the inventory that is modernized. But in terms of consumption, they're still there and they still have a role.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to come back to the trends you're seeing, and maybe come back to it at the end. I want to maybe, because you spoke about, this approach of why advertisers come to an agency, right? You mentioned one of the benefits is, programmatic, being able to buy more efficiently. Obviously with digital, that's changed. You mentioned some of the challenges of, like some companies want to insource. And then of course, pure play digital companies then have less of a reflex of employing and using service providers like agencies. I guess if we look at, let's say, 2020 or this decade, what does it take to build a world-class agency today, in your view?
I think it requires integration, um, and I like what you said, because I think for the longest time, as agency and media agency specifically, our selling proposition was our clout. So we were saying, well, I have that many advertiser with me, I have that much that I invest in market, therefore my clout is big, and I can unlock better price. Um, that's one component of the agency. I think what the agencies are bringing, even more than their clout, is a range of specialty that you cannot afford if you do it in-house. So you can use in your staffing plan a 15% of a data analyst, a 50% of a planner, a 75% of a content creator, and you can scale up and down based on your need. And I think that is the foundation of what I would say is the future of agency, because there's kind of, in my mind, there's three pillars that marketers need to think about as they're evolving the way they work. Is there's almost like what I would call the brand transformation, which is you need to know what you believe in, because we're seeing that consumer have high brand expectation, and the agency will help you craft the story around it. So when I say integration, it's creative and media and performance. Then you need to have the experience, like how to behave, not just in store, but what's the experience online? What's the experience through advertising? And then there's the data transformation, which we touched about earlier on, which is how to connect. So the agency should be the enabler that helps you connect the data, the experience, and the brand messaging all together. And the challenge is, if you try to do it in-house, depending on your size, sometimes you will be able to do it, but the agency unlocks a range of talent to help you do it. And you can decide that 1 year you're focusing more on the data transformation, and the year after you're going to be more on the experience transformation. And the agency has the agility to help you do that. Whereas if you source in-house and you have all those people, it will require a lot of investment to transform those people to follow all the trends. So I'm not saying that one is better than the other. I actually fundamentally believe that sometimes some role actually makes a lot of sense to have in-house. Having it all, I think, is challenging unless you have a significant skill.
Yeah. How do you see your role then, right? Because you mentioned this dichotomy between, I want to say, like the talent and then like the methodology, the best practices. I imagine like at the agency, you mentioned the challenge of talent, right? I think everyone's going through. I'm not sure if it's particularly acute, let's say in the agency world. From what I understand, it is because talented
It
people
is.
have a lot of options in front of them today. So then, how do you spend your time? Is it even the right frame of working on, let's say, okay, I need to think about, consumer data platforms, technology, software, etc., and then think of, I need to develop talent and skills, right? Is that the right frame in terms of how you think about your role?
Yeah, I think it depends. If I think about my role specifically, my role is to be a connector. Like my role is to identify a need from a client perspective and connect it to the right people internally or externally. And it's one thing that I actually like a lot about Dentsu is we've grown through acquisition, right? So there's a lot of entrepreneur within the agency because we acquired so many people over the years. And one of our value is radical collaboration. Um, and for us, radical collaboration is also outside of the Dentsu wall. Like if there's a needs that we identify and we don't have the resources within our walls, is accepting to get it outside of our walls. So my role specifically is to be a connector. But to your point, though, it is very important that we have people that focuses on transformation, and I will call it operation, which for me entails platforms, but it also entails ways of working. And on the other side is people and making sure that we're future proofing them. And I think there's things to be said from an education perspective. If you look at Ontario, they have several programs where people have digital certification as they get out of colleges. They're ready to be in platform. We don't have that in Quebec. And I think this is a significant miss. And that is why everyone is fighting for the same talent right now, because we're taking people out of school, but it is the role of either the agency or the marketers to train those people, and it takes a year and a year and a half to do it. And unfortunately, it's tempting to hire in Ontario because they're trained already. So I do feel that there's some lobbying to be done to make sure that our schooling system gets on par to create the talent that we need for the future.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you speak about this evolution of, the agency, of how it's changed. How do you see it then on the advertiser or the brand side? Like, how has, let's say, maybe a simple tactical question, how's the sales process evolved when you're presenting your agency to a potential prospect? You're pitching the CMO, CEO, and his or her team. How has it changed over the years? Like, what makes a pitch relevant today as an agency?
I guess it depends who we're pitching to. I would say there is a portion of our industry that is still very procurement driven. So I'll go back to what I said at the beginning, that our clout and our pricing is important. I think as an industry, we're making good evolution on it. We're trying to move away from it as much as possible. I think what makes us win is the creativity. We did a survey, a global survey from a Dentsu perspective. We're actually releasing it every year. It's a CMO survey. We're surveying, I think it's over, I would say 600 CMO. Don't quote me on that. It might be seven, but anyway, like a lot of CMO. And it's interesting. I think there's a stat that says like more than 80% of them are saying that creativity is the most important capability to future proof their business. So that's why I say agencies still have a place, but creativity is no longer just something that sits with the creative agency. I think creativity is in data, creativity is in experience, creativity is in media, and it's in your messaging. So I think integration, to go back to what I was saying before, is how do you mix all of it together as opposed to just pitch one element of it.
Yeah, it's being like a maestro, right, of a symphony. You want to make sure that all the different musical pieces sound well together, right? Because like SEO is very different, let's say, than like buying out home ads, right? But it's like there needs to be like un fil conducteur, like a coherent
Yeah, they
line
need to
that
be in sync
mm,
because like one thing will influence the other. And this is the worst thing that you can do is to have all of this in silo. And that's why more and more you do see it even from an advertiser side. The CMO remit is it's much greater than it was 20 years ago. Like it is inclusive of data and technology. It is inclusive of consumer experience, which often touch the in-store experience, which now translate into the online experience. So marketers' role is just broadened, and you need to make sure. We often hear that the CTO and the CMO and the CEO need to be so close, and I think it's fundamental to succeed.
yeah. And so on these, if we double click on some of these marketer challenges, right? You mentioned like it all depends, like which is I think the answer I use for everything. But in this case, is there like pattern recognition amongst, let's say, advertisers, customers in terms of like the same challenges they're facing, specifically when it comes to, let's say, their marketing?
Uh, no, I don't think there is a common thing. Um, I think the one common challenge that I would see is measurement. Is we just talked about the fact that everything worked in combination and in sync, but we still have a tendency to measure all effort in silo. And I do feel that it's something that every advertiser are trying to solve is beyond the MMM, and MMMs are very good. They're just expensive and it takes a long time of collecting data before you get insights. So it's very difficult to be agile with MMM. But I don't think we have cracked the code on measurement in real time that is not just measured because it's attributable, but just measured the halo effect as a whole. And I think in digital, and you and I come from the digital background, we know it, and we're a bit responsible of the beast that we created. But like the last click attribution, and it helped us. Like it really made us scale our business. But was it really relevant to measure it? Probably not. And it's legacy metric and vanity metric that we're still using. So I would say the common challenge that I see amongst everyone is how do you measure success? And how do you measure it in real time so you can adjust?
Do you then think about how you help the CMOs with this challenge, right? Like your customers, I imagine, like more often than not, it's the CMO. So when she is in a boardroom and then thinking about her agency and like with her different colleagues on the C-suite, is that you think the biggest challenge? Is it's like proving their worth to a certain extent, like the CMO. Like I think what was the stat? I don't know if it's changed, but it was like the average tenure of a CMO was like 18 months or something like this.
Yeah, it
Something quite
varies.
small.
Yeah, I think yeah, it's not just proving their worth, it's proving that it's not in isolation of everything else. And I know I keep on repeating it, but I fundamentally believe in it. And And also, everything cannot be measured in short term. Like building brands take time. And it's not going to happen in 18 months. So maybe what you started 18 months ago will actually pay off from a brand recognition, a connection with your consumer, a passion that will pay off in 2 years. So I think we need to balance the long term and short term, and just make sure that those two things are as important. Um, I think what happens with digital is short term became so easy to measure that it became the only thing that we were measuring. And I often say to client, like the question I ask all the time is, are we measuring it because we can, or we're measuring it because we should? And often we have dashboards with so many metrics, and it's just because we can measure it, but it's not meaningful.
Yeah, I'm going to steal that line: measuring it because we can or because we should. Definitely, that's
You
definitely true.
you would be surprised how many people are like, "Oh, yeah, maybe just because we can."
Yeah. My perspective is also, it's like, I think marketing, particularly in more traditional organizations or large organizations, has always been seen as a cost center. It's
Yeah.
like, oh, we need to take X percentage of our, revenue, put it into marketing. And then it's seen as, okay, well, do the best that you can with this 5-10% that we've given you, right? So optimize it. But then it becomes almost disconnected from the end results that it provides, right? We hope it drove some kind of result, right? Like, the classic, a quote of 50% of my marketing worked. I just don't know which 50. And I think, going back to the digital side, I think the thing that's exciting to me is that it should be considered much more a profit center moving forward,
Yeah.
right? So it's going back
And
to
it's
have the right measurement. Exactly.
and it's the difference between return on ad spend, which is very immediate, and lifetime value of a consumer. And I would argue that not a lot of advertisers are measuring lifetime value. And lifetime is something that you build over time. And some
Hmm.
years it's going to cost you less, some years it's going to cost you more. But if an average what you invested is less than the return that you're getting, that should be the metric. But going back to what we said at the beginning, it does require first party data to be able to do it. It does require the infrastructure to measure it. But lifetime value is ultimately what we should look at.
Yeah, yeah. Some of my clients have basically told me, okay, can you stop talking about TV? Like, we get it. Like, we've heard you. So it's like, I think it's an important concept. Maybe to switch gears a little bit, like, as you groom, let's say, the next generation, what do you tell people coming into the industry, right? Because we both came in around the same time, and like I said, we made our chops during the rise of digital. For someone coming in today that are that are basically digital natives, how do you groom them? How do you help them grow into their role?
Um, well, I think the thing that I say the most to people is don't wait for someone to tell you that you're ready for a promotion. Just like go for it. There's something that I'm very proud of is I've been at Dentsu for 18 years, which sounds forever, but I probably had over 17 positions at Dentsu, and I never ever took a position that existed before. So I always created my new job, and I'm very proud of that. And I think it came from the fact that it was just about identifying that something could be improved. And I didn't ask the permission to improve it, or I didn't ask um, how to do it. Like I didn't ask for someone to give me a title to do it. And I think that is the best advice to any generation is you should be the lead of your own career, and don't wait for someone to give you a title to do something. Do it and you will get the title. And for me, like, it's just about a culture of leaning in, and being involved, digital, offline, creative, wherever it is. I fundamentally believe that growth comes from passion, and growth comes from being able to identify solutions and be willing to invest the time to solve it.
Yeah, it's similar to, let's say, like the owner's mindset to a little bit, or even if you're an employee, but you need to come in with this kind of mindset of, I'll take on more responsibility and get shit done, and then it's going to lead to good things eventually.
Well, it's interesting because I said earlier on, like Dentsu has a lot of entrepreneur because we acquired so many people, and I always say that I'm the entrepreneur amongst all the entrepreneur. But I think that's why I fit well, and that's why I'm still there, right? It's because I never really took it as just a job. It's like if it was mine, and it works. I think we spend so much time at work, might as well do something that we like, right?
Yeah. What are you mentioned the acquisitions, right? So it's like, if you zoom out, obviously, I'm like looking at your role as a CEO of DentsuX. One of the growth strategies has been acquisition. What are the other areas of investment like that they're stimulating growth? Like, is it on like, are you guys buying software companies to help complement a lot of the capabilities that you guys are doing? So curious in terms of, from a capital allocation perspective, the strategy you guys are doing.
Yeah, we've diversified our acquisition. Obviously, we didn't do a lot of them in the last 2 years. Um, I think we've acquired for capabilities for sure. We've acquired for talent. Um, I think from a software perspective, obviously everything that relates to data capability, We've done significant investment. We've acquired Merkle, which is the biggest company in the world to do that. And we're now launching it in every market. So for us, it was often take the leader, acquire it, and then make sure that you can replicate in other market. And I think that's been the strategy a lot, is find the incubator, and knowing that from these resources, we will be able to scale from a global perspective. That's been a bit of the focus. From a platform perspective, we're licensing more than we're acquiring, just because I don't think it's necessarily our area of expertise.
Yeah, yeah, it's better to buy than to build in certain cases.
Yeah,
I love also that acquisition strategy of like buy locally then scale globally, right? So like find a niche, like obviously,
because
I
it's
think,
impossible. If you try to find something that is already global, good luck. It's not going to work.
yeah, yeah, and then it's also the price you pay. It's going to be a much more expensive endeavor, and like you said, it's also like rare in terms of finding those kinds of global companies. Um, what are you most interested about right now, like maybe at a broader, more intellectual level, not just, let's say, in marketing, advertising, things that obviously related to to your professional line of work, but things that you think that are important but not yet widely understood, so just in terms of your intellectual curiosity today.
Oh, that's a good question. Well, obviously, I'll go back to a bit of when I was talking about the algorithm and all of this. I think tech for good, and I know it's a passion point for you as well, but I think it's I think it's not fully explored yet, and I think we need to define what good means. Which is, oops, can you hear me? Have you lost me? Um, I think tech for good is definitely the an interesting path, because what good means. And I feel like I'm thinking about it. I'm looking at my end, and I have the Oura Ring, and I have the Apple Watch, and I'm like, my data is all over the place, especially from a health perspective. And like legislation around this is something that I'm very interesting. Like, what's going to happen to it? What will be the future of using this data to actually improve your life quality? Um, and how we will make sure that it doesn't get leaked. I think it's very interesting, and I'm not sure that our governments, regardless of the which one it is, I don't think we're paying enough attention to it.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's going to be definitely worth a take two to talk about this whole concept of tech for good. Like I said, something I'm very interested and passionate about as well. And like I said, it's still so early days that we're just kind of figuring out, which is why I find it exciting. It's almost like kind of like back to when we came into the industry and like it was all new, shit didn't work, and now it's like this whole new field in terms of like how do you think about this, the societal gain, and not just, let's say, things like enterprise software, which great, it
Yeah,
works.
and there's things that are happening that are also like so creative, like going back to creativity. There's a company, and I the name is escaping me, but they've created a network of people, and it's for people that are blind. And basically, if you're blind but you're somewhere and you need attention, you can take a picture and you access a network of people that will actually become your eyes, and they will describe to you what you cannot see. And I find it so beautiful, the power of connection, but also helping people with disability. I feel like there's something absolutely magical. So yeah, I like when I find out those little gems of things that I'm like, wow, there's faith in humanity.
Yeah, yeah. I think the more meta point is, you mentioned it before, is like the most important thing is creativity. I think that's what people are good at, and then things like crunching data in Excel. Pretty sure an algorithm is going to be able to do that better than us, right? Like I'm thinking of my past life
I
of just
bet.
doing Excel work.
I can
So
barely do a pivot table. So
I used to be Ninja level 8 in terms of Excel. I've kind of lost the skills, but could probably bring it out. Yeah, I think it's a kind of a great way to end the conversation. Right? You mentioned this importance of creativity, which for me, it's, why does someone hire an agency? It's really because of people outside of the box, right? So it's like, and it takes all shapes and forms. Like you said, this notion of bias is important to overcome as well, because creativity is not found in one single type of person. So yeah, I think it may be a great cap. I'll let you comment on it if you see any points.
no, I think it's a good recap. And the one thing that I would say is execution is a strategy. And I think that's one other thing that I'm spending a lot of time on is like brilliant basics, making sure that brilliant basics are covered. And I feel that sometimes we see a bit of a gap between the brilliant basics and the strategy. And I feel like sometimes people are thinking that I sometimes hear things like, well, execution, it's low value or it's hands on keyboard. And I'm like, no, 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 no. Like strategy is nothing without a very good execution. So this is one thing that I'm very passionate about is how do you build the brilliant basics? How do you make sure that people enjoy doing the brilliant basics? Strategy is one thing, and strategy is fun, but execution is not an underdog. It has to be tied to the strategy.
Yeah, you're preaching to the choir here, Jen. So for sure, for sure. Jen, I could probably bug you for more hours, and we will. I guess final question would be: is best way if people want to learn about the work that you guys are doing at Dentsu and reach out to yourself personally? What's the best way?
Well, dentsu.com, we have tons of white paper there. And my LinkedIn is usually the best way to connect with me. It's easy. It's Genevieve Guay. I think it's straight and all. There's not many of us, so I'm pretty easy to find.
Jen, thank you so much for your time.
Yes,